Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this week's Lunch and Learn. I'm Tony Ross, the Director of Communications at LIWC Research. Before we get to today's presentation, a bit of business. Today's event is brought to you by QDA Minor. Yesterday, we launched a new version, QDA Minor 6. QDA Minor 6 has many new features to help you code and analyze open-ended questions, surveys, social media, and any other type of text document. Some of the new features include a grid view, a quotation matrix, the ability to treat Asian languages, import easily from LexisNexis and Factiva to analyze news reports, a new interactive word cloud, easy export to Tableau, and many other features. And many of these features were highlighted in our newsletter that we would have sent out to many of you this morning. Please visit the What's New section for QDA Minor on our website to see an explanation of the new features with screenshots. You can purchase or upgrade to version 6 by going to the pricing section of our website, provalisresearch.com. So it's kind of like this is kind of like public radio, so that was the sponsor bringing you today's event. Now to today's presentation, which is deductive text analytics using categorization models for confirmatory approaches and hypothesis testing. We're pleased to have with us today as our presenter, Dr. Derek Cogburn. Derek has 10+ years working with QDA Minor and WordStat. He's a professor of information technology and analytics, Gogod School of Business, American University, professor of international communication and international development, School of International Service, American University. Derek teaches graduate seminars on big data analytics and text mining using ProSuite and RStudio. He has coordinated multiple United Nations workshops, side events on text mining in international affairs, sustainable development goals, and CRPD implementation. Derek has published multiple articles and conference papers on text mining. He is president and CEO, managing director of Praxis Analytic LLC, offering consulting services in data and text analytics. At the end of the presentation, if you wish to ask questions, please send them to us through the chat feature at the bottom right of your screen. We will take as many as time allows. And now I will turn the presentation over to Derek.
Thank you very much, Tony. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the public service announcement and our sponsor of QDA Minor. I appreciate that, and good luck with the new launch. I'm really excited to be here and thankful that so many of you decided to take an hour to spend with me during your lunch while we learn together some of the capabilities and techniques that I think you might find useful in QDA Minor and WordStat in particular, and on text mining broadly speaking as well. As Tony said today, I'll talk a little bit about a technique that I like a lot called categorization models, and I'll help to put them in the context of how they fit within some of the broader text mining strategies that I and others like to use. And I'll do so by giving you a bit of a case study of using these techniques, looking at 12 years of transcripts from the Internet Governance Forum, which is organized by the United Nations. So I want to do 4 things today very quickly. So I'll help to set the context for the case study by talking a little bit about Internet governance research. I'll give you the methodology that we use for these approaches. It's called the CRISP-DM approach. And then I'll talk about some of the key inductive and deductive approaches that we use. So I'll talk about some of the exploratory techniques and some of the confirmatory techniques, and I'll highlight categorization models, and I'll talk a bit about how to build categorization models, what they are and how you use them, and then I'll give an example in the case study on the Internet Governance Forum. So first, in terms of Internet governance research, so just to let everybody know, this is a field that emerged in the mid-1990s, highly interdisciplinary research domain, growing tremendously, lots of potential in this area for big data analytics and particularly for text analytics. So in this field, we have committee archives, meeting transcripts, email listservs, email and meeting archives, reports, speeches, stakeholder submissions. There's an enormous amount of social media feeds that are available for analysis in this field. We also have legal documents, treaties, public documents, and so forth. So these tools make it exciting to work in the field of Internet governance. And there's also the growing availability of computational tools like QDA Minor and Provalis on the commercial side, and also open source tools like R and RStudio and Python and so forth. So when you have these kinds of opportunities of this much text-based data available to you, how do you manage a project? How do you think about structuring a project from start to finish? You can talk about these various techniques, but most of us want to have a full project from start to finish. And the Christian methodology applied to text mining is one of the tools that allows us to do that. So with CRISDM stands for the Cross-Industry Standard Process for Data Mining. And this takes this area of text mining and brings it to bear on a particular problem and project that you are interested in. And it's a documented, standardized process for both thinking about a project, conceptualizing a project, structuring that project, and then leading that project from start to finish. It's got 6 basic steps. So it focuses on being very clear of what your problem is, and that sometimes takes an enormous amount of time being clear about how to structure a problem so that these techniques can help you solve the problem. You can explore the availability of data. Is there data available that will let you address that problem? And then can you access that data? Can you get your hands on it? How do you prepare that data? And then developing the analytical models and tools that you'll use to be able to analyze that data and answer those questions. And that's where you get your findings, your results, and your recommendations, and you can sort of go back and forth through this circle at any time. So when we're doing a text mining project, I and others tend to divide this work into 2 broad categories. So inductive work and deductive work. So the inductive approaches tend to be exploratory. So think about one of these very large data sets that I just mentioned earlier. Somebody gives that to you and you say, I wonder what's there. These are the inductive or exploratory techniques that WordStat and QDA Miner allow you to really explore. So first, you can do descriptive analysis. Imagine somebody gave you a quantitative data set and you said, I wonder what these variables represent and how these variables are included in the data set. So you might run frequency distributions on all the variables in the data set to get a sense of measures of central tendency, mean, median, mode. How are these variables distributed in the data set if you had a survey data or something like that? You can do the same thing with text. So you can do keyword frequency analysis using keywords. You can do key phrases. You can take some other exploratory techniques like topic modeling and named entity extraction. Very, very exciting approaches. Hierarchical clustering and correspondence analysis. These techniques all allow you to go in and explore a data set, and you can use that to generate hypotheses. You can use it to learn the data set, understand the data set a bit better. But then there's a whole series of other techniques that let you essentially go into the data set looking for certain specific things. So these are more deductive approaches or confirmatory approaches, and you can even do hypothesis testing where you might propose that there is some relationship between one variable and another, or how certain variables change over time, or whether or not this concept is present or absent, more or less in relationship to other variables and so forth. And you can do that through these confirmatory approaches. And in particular, you can do that with categorization models. So let's talk a little bit about categorization models for the rest of this talk. So you'll hear me use the term categorization models. That is a term that Provalis uses fairly regularly. Out in the rest of the industry, they're referred to frequently as dictionaries or lexicons. For me, I really, really like the term categorization models. I think they are the term is very evocative, and it helps us to understand essentially what we're trying to do. We're trying to take a large amount of data. We use this bag of words approach. So all these words are sort of gathered together in a corpus. And we want to be able to take those words and put them into meaningful categories that we define in advance. And so the idea of a categorization model is from my perspective, very evocative as a term. But all 3 of these essentially mean the same thing, where we have categorization models, dictionaries, or lexicons, and you'll hear people refer to them in various ways. And I just want to give a shout out to my friend and colleague and collaborator and partner in crime, Mike Hine from Carleton University. He has a really good article on dictionary development that he's submitted to the Hicks conference that we coordinate along with Dr. Pelledu, a workshop on text mining and a mini track on text mining. So if anybody's interested in putting some of these techniques into practice, we've got some outlets for you as well. So Mike, thanks for putting this article together. And I encourage everyone to take a look at it. So if you think about categorization models, as I said, they're different from the inductive approaches where you're exploring. With a categorization model, it's a deductive approach. So you're going into the data set, trying to detect the presence or absence, or the relative presence or absence of something in the text. So something that you're interested in. Now that something can be a psychometric concept, it can be a socio-political concept, a linguistic concept, or many, many others. So essentially, you're trying to create a semantic representation of that concept. So the way I try to explain it sometimes is, if you are a subject matter expert and you would normally do a qualitative study where you would do a close read of a text, as you're reading that text, there are going to be certain things that you as an expert are looking for in that text. If they say this, or if they say that, or if they use this phrase in conjunction with this phrase, or if they use this phrase, but they don't have these other words, all that means something to you as a subject matter expert. And what you can do is you can build a dictionary or a categorization model to mirror that expertise that you have, that concept that you have. You can build the dictionary around those words and phrases and presence and absence and so forth, those rules that you would look for as an expert. You can build a dictionary that lets you now go through not just 10 documents or 100 documents. You can go through 100,000 documents with the same approach that you would, almost as if you were reading it. And that's really one of the powerful techniques of this tool. You have to make the tool do what it does well, but it can't do everything. But for the things that it does do, it does exceptionally well. So these dictionaries may be domain independent. So it may be that you can build a dictionary that's relatively generic, looking for concepts, and it can carry over from corpus to corpus. So different data sets that you build, the same dictionary could transfer from those. It could be also domain specific, where you've got a very narrow, very specific concept, and the domain independent dictionary might not work as well in that context. And so now you need to develop a specific domain specific dictionary that really brings in a lot of that subject matter expertise, and is a very narrow, looks at this very narrow concept. So you can build your own dictionary, or you can modify existing ones if they're open source and available. You can use these dictionaries in standalone studies, or you can use them to create other variables that you can use in other models, other quantitative models if you want. Dictionaries also help you to address what's called the polymorphy of language, as Dr. Pelledu talks about it, where different languages, different words can be used to reflect the same concept. So there are a number of ways to say that you like something or you appreciate something, and almost any concept has multiple ways and multiple words that can be used to get at that concept. And that's why I also, when people say sometimes, oh, well, text mining, you're just searching for a particular word. Well, you could search for a particular word, but when you build a dictionary, it's a much more complex approach than that. You're taking all that you know about that subject, and you're building not just one way to search for that word or that concept or that phrase. You're building a number of ways to search for that concept and phrase, and that makes it a very rich technique to be able to use to understand, again, the presence or absence of that concept in a text-based data set. So there are a number of existing dictionaries, and many academics make these dictionaries available for free to download. Some academics will license their dictionaries. And one of the dictionaries that is really popular, and it is licensable now, is called the LIWC, the Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count Dictionary. And I want to talk about that just a moment before we turn to the case study. So the LIWC was developed by Pennebaker and et al. In 2015, and it's designed to measure 4 complex categories. So when I say I really like the idea of a categorization model, because you're going to take a concept that you're interested in and build 4 key categories of what the target that you're looking for. So you want to measure linguistic processes, psychological processes, personal concerns, and spoken categories. This is what this LIWC model will do, and this is the way it looks building that model in WordStat. So you start with the highest level categories, and then for each of those categories, like psychological processes, you can have additional subcategories. And so I like to refer to this as complex multi-level categorization models. So you can keep going down multiple levels of categories, subcategories, sub-subcategories, and so forth, until you get to specific words and phrases and rules that help you understand when to count that as an example of that category. And everything just aggregates up to back up to the individual category. So now you see every example of these words and phrases, and you can weight the words and phrases if you want. And again, the rules say when this word or phrase appears, but it's in the same paragraph with this word, but if this other phrase is there, don't count it. So you can build some very complex rules, and anytime one of those instances occurs, it aggregates up to the subcategories and then aggregates back up to the main category. So now when you see that linguistic processing, that category may have 50 examples, those 50 examples could have come from any of these subcategories and any of these, if you had subcategories, and then various ways of exploring those subcategories in any of these words and phrases. You can also have WordStat report to you at each of those levels. So if you want to drill down and say how many of the subcategories are present and not just the high level categories, you can do that as well. So it's a very, very powerful technique. Dictionaries are time consuming. So whereas the exploratory techniques that I talked about earlier can be done relatively quickly once you prepare the data and do some pre-processing and make sure you're comfortable with the corpus, you can do those exploratory techniques relatively quickly and start to visualize them and so forth. The dictionary building is a much more difficult, time-consuming process, especially if you want to do it properly. Dictionary development requires domain expertise, and so you need to make sure you understand the concepts that you are using as you build the dictionary. Now, again, you can apply some existing dictionaries, and in some cases, such as with sentiment analysis, so WordStat and QDA Minor come packaged with a built-in sentiment analysis dictionary. And when you try to use it, the recommendation is you might want to customize this. So you might want to go back and look at the words and phrases that are in that dictionary, and you might want to customize it for your particular domain that you're working in. So you can use those existing dictionaries. You can apply them. Concept that's not yet out there in a previous dictionary, it is going to be time consuming. I'll warn you in advance. And if you take on a lot, like we're in the middle of a very big, complex, multi-level dictionary development and validation process, it takes usually a little bit of a team around you to work on something like that. I'm happy to talk about that in more detail. So there are a number of approaches. You can have manual approaches to building the dictionary. You can have semi-automatic approaches or even automatic approaches. You can vary between being very theory-driven as you build the dictionary. So conceptually, what is it that you're looking for? Or you can be driven by the data and actually build the dictionary from within the text of the corpus that you're building the dictionary on. So QDA Minor and WordStat have a number of tools within them to build dictionaries. So you can do clustering and topic modeling to help identify key concepts and words and phrases to use as you build your dictionaries, frequency lists, phrase extraction, named entity recognition. All of these can be used to build dictionaries. And so it's not a super rigid approach to how you get to your dictionary. You can build small dictionaries, for very, very specific concepts, or you could build large, unwieldy dictionaries as well. And the main thing to keep in mind here is, what is the dictionary being built for? You want to make sure you're clear, why are you building this dictionary? And as you go through these steps, you want to be clear about that, because you can't just start taking that dictionary and applying it to something else if it wasn't built to do that. You've got to be clear on clarifying, why are you building the dictionary? So are you building it to do theory building and testing? Are you trying to monitor certain content over time? Are you trying to identify any new concepts? So there are a number of things you can do, and it requires you, or at least to have access to a domain expert as you're trying to build the dictionary yourself. So please do keep that in mind. So now I'd like to turn to a case study of some of these techniques and really highlight the role of a categorization model and some confirmatory approaches and even hypothesis testing. So I want to talk about the Internet Governance Forum. And as I do this, this is an absolute shameless plug. I am so excited that my colleagues and I had a book launch on Tuesday for a new book that we published with MIT Press called Researching Internet Governance. And chapter 9 of this book, my chapter, focuses on text mining with WordStat, and it covers some of the same data and analysis that we'll talk about here in this case study. We did get a grant from the Hewlett Foundation, so the book is available for free download by open access with MIT Press. And if you look at that top QR code up here on the right-hand side, that will take you to a link to download the book for free. And if you look at this QR code down here at the bottom, that will take you to the recording from Tuesday where we launched the book. So I'll leave those up for a little bit while I introduce the case study, and we'd love for you to download the book and take a look at it, and particularly my chapter on text mining, but the whole book. So this case study is around a very interesting organization. It's an institutional innovation called the Internet Governance Forum, or the IGF for short. The UN established the IGF at the end of the World Summit on the Information Society, which ended in Tunis. So there were two phases of the World Summit, 2003 in Geneva and 2005 in Tunis. Another shameless plug, I am an academic. I've got a book, came out in 2017 called Transnational Advocacy Networks in the Information Society. So it covers that history. It's an annual forum. It's held under the auspices of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. There have been 12 meetings of this IGF in this that I cover in this chapter. So it goes from 2006 in Athens to 2017 in Geneva. And since I wrote the chapter, there have been 2 more, and the third one is taking place next month in 2020. So this is a great source of data and innovation in terms of institutions. And so the purpose of this study for me was to really understand 12 years of these IGF meetings. And I wanted to be able to extract important policy topics and themes, people that were talked about, organizations that were talked about. And so those were important exploratory goals and questions that I had. But then I also had some confirmatory goals, because the US government announced a cybersecurity framework that came out under the auspices of the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. And it came out first in 2014. And I wanted to see, was there any relationship between the introduction of that framework and the discussion of cybersecurity issues as they were outlined in that framework in the Internet Governance Forum. So I wanted to explore that. And so those are my confirmatory approaches, where I used a categorization model. So I asked 3 questions, 2 that were more on the inductive side and 1 that was more on the deductive side. So the first 2 questions, what are the key themes and topics and entities that were discussed at the IGF. And you can think about those techniques that I talked about to be able to answer RQ1, 1.1, and 1.2, so each of those elements. And then which key issues have remained consistent and which ones have changed. So you can put in variables like year and look at to see the degree to which those topics, themes, and entities have changed over time, which is also helpful. And then to what extent did that 2014 NIST cybersecurity framework get represented at the IGF? Now, the nice thing for us, as I mentioned in the internet governance field, there's some tremendous opportunities for access to data, big data for text analytics. So one of the decisions that they made back in 2006 was to make all of the meeting transcripts available to the public. So all of the main sessions, all the opening and closing ceremonies going back to 2006 have transcripts available for them. Now, I have to say part of this was an accessibility feature because this comes from the closed captioning. So it's imperfect, it's a limitation, like every study, every technique has limitations, but it does give us 1,020 transcripts to be able to study over this 12-year period. So we automated the data collection. We used a tool called SiteSucker. I used some other tools in R called RVIS, for example, and Selector Gadget to be able to parse websites now. But SiteSucker is a very user-friendly tool to be able to use. It brought down the data in 3 different formats, so PDFs, text files, and HTML files. I added a variable for year and country, so you can look across the year and the country, and analyze them in the Provalis Pro Suite. And this data is all publicly available, so you could go back and redo it. So let's go through the exploratory questions pretty quickly here. So what are the key themes and topics discussed at the IGF over its lifetime? So anybody who's actively involved in the IGF has a sense of the kinds of topics and issues that they're discussing, but I spent enormous amounts of money going to these meetings and following internet governance. But any of you could do the same type of study without having gone to all of these conferences, and you'd be able to pull out a lot of the same key issues. So we can see that over the whole data set from 2006 to 2017, 2006 to 2017, one of the dominant themes that existed across the data set was human rights, one of the most important issues discussed at this IGF. And for those who are actively involved in the IGF know that that is a huge issue of importance in the IGF. Freedom of expression, another one, very, very highly ranked phrase or issue that was discussed. Developing countries, multi-stakeholder, data protection, social media, net neutrality, the Internet of Things, remote participation. These are all concepts that this is confirming that this data set and these techniques are pulling out key themes and topics from this data set. We can also look at certain entities. So we can, this is another way of pulling out concepts. So IPv stands for Internet Protocol version. There's a IPv4 and IPv6. Youth, cybersecurity, Internet of Things. And then there's another technique. This is hierarchical cluster analysis. And this is such an interesting technique. I have to focus. I want to get to the categorization model here. But these techniques allow you to pull out the relationships between specific words. And so if you look down at the bottom here, you can see these 2 words are close together. So sexual abuse, then you add, so those are very close together, plus child, plus images. So you can see that one of the key concepts was about images of child sexual abuse. That's one cluster here. One other cluster was around gender and violence, another cluster around hate speech. So these techniques are really, really powerful at being able to explore some of those key concepts in a data set this large. Then we can look to see the degree to which those change over time. So we can look at top phrases that have changed. So in 2006, we had youth and ICANN and cybersecurity going up to 2017. We see cybersecurity still remains, has grown as a concept. Women has grown, fake news, blockchain, and so forth. You can also do topic modeling and look at the degree to which topics have stayed the same or changed over time. That's also interesting. And there's some other visualizations like heat maps and so forth. But now let's look at the categorization model. So all of that was exploratory research. But now what if there's something I want to go into the data set to assess its presence or absence? To what extent is this concept there? And so, as I mentioned, we built a multi-level complex categorization model focused on the 2014 cybersecurity framework. So if you go back and look at this framework, it is, let's see, I think I'm sharing my screen. I think I can do this without embarrassing myself here. Okay, Tony, can you tell me, can you see the Excel spreadsheet now?
Yes.
I think you can. Okay, great. So this gives you a sense of what the NIST cybersecurity framework looks like. So on the far left are going to be the categories that I'm going to build the framework on. So identify is one. So it's going to be identify, protect, respond, detect, and recover. So those are the 5 big categories. Then the second column, column B, are the subcategories. So under identify, I'm going to build a category for governance, for risk assessment, and so forth. Column C are subcategories. So organizational cybersecurity policy, which is established and commissioned and so forth and so on. So I stopped at column C. So I got categories in column A, subcategories in column B, subcategories in column C, and that's what I built the model around. Now let's see if I can get back to my PowerPoint. Great, I think you see my PowerPoint now, right? Yes, I can see that, all right. So you can see how I built those same top 5 categories, identify, protect, respond, detect, recover. Under each of those, I built a subcategory. And then under each of those, I built a subcategory. That was at column C, I believe it was. And then I had certain words, phrases, and rules that reflected that content in the cybersecurity model. So it's a pretty detailed model. So now you've got something like this. You've got a semantic representation of that spreadsheet, of that model, which is designed to try to assess the degree to which a company or organization is in line with the recommendations for cybersecurity coming out of NIST under President Obama's administration. So now you've got this model. What do you do with this model? So you've got this model and you've got this data set, 12 years of data. So I wanted to see, looking across this whole data set, were these concepts in the model, I'm sorry, in the data or not? So I applied that to the whole data set, and I can tell that yes, some of these concepts are in the data set, but I can also see which of the categories got the most attention in the data set. So the questions of identify and protect, those categories in the model got a lot of attention, whereas respond, detect, and recover got very little attention. Now, again, I was telling you where we can drill down and get more, you can get into the sub level, so we can see within each of those what was driving it. So the business environment, awareness and training, so those categories received a lot of attention. So you can, what this is telling us is that there were discussions around the kinds of the framework talks about as creating a business environment to support cybersecurity and doing awareness and training around cybersecurity, which is good. But some of the other issues like governance and asset management, information protection, communication, people are not talking about those as much in this conference. And that's able to tell us. We can even go down to the third level and see specifically, you know, what issues are people talking about the most. So third-party stakeholders, organizational priorities, managing credentials, and so forth. Now, for the hypothesis testing, you know, yes, this is certainly happening within this data set, but what did it, what's the relationship, or is there any relationship between when this concept was introduced in 2014 and discussions over this 12-year period? And this chart really jumped out at me. And so you can see, going back to 2008 up to 2007, relatively minor or flat discussions around these particular concepts, related to cybersecurity. We know that people were talking about cybersecurity earlier, but they weren't using these concepts to talk about cybersecurity. But in 2014, look at what happened. So two of the components, two of the 5 major categories took a major jump in 2014. And from 2014 up to 2015, a big jump in those 2 categories. And then for this category of identify, it continued every year with more and more people talking about it the way that it was identified in that NIST cybersecurity framework. 2016 saw a little bit of a dip in the area of protect, but then it jumped as well in 2017. So one could say that there's a relationship between the introduction of that concept at NIST and the discussion of those concepts, or the way people talked about those concepts within the Internet Governance Forum. So I will end now, again, with shameless plugs for an academic's books. Our book on researching Internet governance, that's at the top there. My book on transnational advocacy networks is on the bottom there. And look forward to hearing any conversations that you might have, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you might have after this session. Tony, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, I just had to turn on my mic. Okay, thank you very much, Derek, for that presentation. If you have a question for Derek, please use the chat feature. You see the little bubble on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Click on that, and then you can write a question, and we'll take a few questions here for, say, the next 10, 15 minutes, or as long as we have them. First question, Derek, can you suggest websites or sources to find existing dictionaries other than the WordStat dictionary page on the Provalis website, which lists several dictionaries that are either included with WordStat or can be had for a small fee? Are there other sources that you could suggest?
So that is the $64,000 question, and somebody should take this up and do that. So my short answer is no. My longer answer is yes, sort of. Other than the Provalis website, I have not seen any good aggregation of dictionaries, and I think that's unfortunate. I would like to know about more of them as well. I'd like to be able to use more of them as well. I certainly like it when an academic will make their dictionary available to use or to license, and you know, I understand if they need to charge for the dictionary as well. So that's a challenge. Where they are, so no, I don't know of any good place that aggregates them. But what I will say is that there are a number of sentiment analysis dictionaries, really measuring positive and negative sentiment, different dimensions of sentiment, that are available within some of the open source data analytics packages like R. And in our studio, there are some sentiment analysis dictionaries that you can unpack and take a look at and use all of those for free. But unfortunately, Tony, there's not a good site that aggregates those dictionaries that I know of.
Okay, thanks, Derek. And to everybody who's out there on this call, if you are doing research and you do produce a dictionary, and you would like it to get wider exposure, or you think it would be useful to other people, please get in contact with us, because we're always looking to compile new dictionaries, and we have various ways of working out some type of shared compensation or whatever. But please get in contact with us if you build one that you think is particularly good in your research. Did you use WordStat and QDA Minor to do this, or just WordStat?
So I feel like I'm kind of old school. When I first learned QDA Minor, I think it was 11, 12, 13 years ago or so, I learned QDA Minor first and then moved into WordStat. So I got in the habit of starting all my projects in QDA Minor, using QDA Minor to kind of build my projects and store all my documents, and sometimes do some CACDAS type analysis in QDA Minor. and then move over to WordStat. So I kind of got in the habit of that, and I think that's what I did on this particular project. Now, as many people know, with WordStat 8, you can go directly into WordStat 8. You don't have to go from QDA Minor, and you can look at your data and adjust variables and values on the data. You can do all of that within WordStat now. And so, you know, many people may want to just do work in WordStat without going into QDA Minor first, but I still kind of like that. I like that feeling that I get working in QDA Minor.
Okay, thank you. Do you have an opinion on when we should use a dictionary versus machine learning to classify unstructured data?
It's another great question. So with machine learning, one of the challenges is, particularly with supervised machine learning, is being able to have the training sets. So if you have the time, or if you have the ability to hand code training data to feed to the classifier to build that up, that's certainly a great strategy for moving forward. What I found with dictionaries is it allows you to be very deliberate about what you want the structure to look like, and you want to assess the degree to which that structure is there or not. Whereas the machine learning algorithm identifying patterns and themes that are coming out of what you're training the classifier, and then going to look for those. But I like the categorization model's approach of this very structured, rigid structure that you set up. And again, like in my case, for example, modeling the highly stratified NIST framework to see if that is present or absent or not. So that's sort of my thinking about it. If you have the time, you can do the build the training sets and then teach the classifier. That's certainly an additional tool to use in these approaches if you have that time. And okay. I guess part of it, Tony, is do you want to spend time doing building the training set, or do you want to spend time building the dictionary? And you know, it's sort of 6 on one hand, half a dozen on the other in a certain way.
Okay, thank you. On dictionary building tools, which one would you recommend more for deductive text analytics? You mentioned 7, from phrase extraction to clustering and topic modeling. Do you have a favorite or a selection of favorites?
Sorry, I was trying to turn off my timer there. Would you repeat that question, please?
Sure. On dictionary building tools, which one would you recommend more for deductive text analytics? You mentioned 7, from phrase extraction to clustering and topic modeling. Do you have a favorite, or do you have a particular, you know, selection of favorites or a process that you prefer?
Sure. Well, you know, there used to be this old game that we would play called Scruples, and the options to the answer was yes, no, or depends. And if you pushed it, it was always depends. So I'm going to say it depends. So depending on what your goals are, the techniques I say are going to be different. So if you are a subject matter expert yourself, and you want to do some theory building, and you are able to look at, think about the concepts that you would look for if you were reading this text, and you can build a first crack at the categories and the subcategories and then the words and phrases, that's going to be very valuable, and you can start to use that. And then you can add to that by using thesauri, and other ways to sort of build that out. So that's, from my perspective, is a perfectly reasonable, valid way to move forward with building this dictionary based on the subject matter expertise and applying that. If you are trying to, you believe that there's some interesting concepts in the data that maybe that came from the inductive side, and you want to build that particularly using the words and phrases in the way that they're used in this particular data set, and it's going to be very specific to that corpus, then using you know, keyword and context, and using the tools that allow you to right-click on many of the categories and phrases and so forth to build the dictionary within WordStat is a very, very powerful approach. So I think it really, from my perspective, it depends on what the goals are and what your level of subject matter expertise is. So let me give you a quick example. So one of the projects that we're working on, we're interested in the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And many of us working on the project are subject matter experts, and had another book here. I feel like I'm pitching books here today. But where we looked at implementing the CRPD in Southeast Asia, and we had teams on the ground analyzing data for implementing the CRPD. So we took the first crack. We wanted to look across the world at implementing the CRPD. And so we took a first crack at building a model just on Article 33, which is focused on implementation. It tells us to look for 3 things with implementation in any kind of a state report or something like that. So we first built it just from our own subject matter expertise of what would it mean to read about a country implementing Article 33. So we built it that way. Then we started to think about all of these other possibilities of the rest of the convention, and we looked at the globally agreed upon indicators for what would it mean if the rest of the articles were being implemented. And so that took us back to kind of what we were doing with the NIST cybersecurity framework. It's very structured, very rigid. And so we wanted to build a categorization model to mimic that structure. And so then we built it that way. So it really does depend on what your goals are, I think, and what your level of subject matter expertise.
Okay. Some of you are asking a lot of questions about specificities of the software. For example, can you use R with it, or can you use talking about other packages in Python? You're also asking questions about how do you sort of normalize text and things like that. We'll respond to those questions to you after the webinar. I don't really want to get Derek into putting him on a spot about giving a tutorial on WordStat and QDA Minor. So if you have other sort of questions, general questions, or even specific questions on dictionary building, on other aspects of his presentation, please go ahead. But let's try to stay away from some of the behind the scenes of the software. Like I said, we will respond to you individually on that. Also, if you have a question that you find is maybe a little bit complicated to ask in the text, you can be able to send emails to Derek after the session. His contact information is available. I have a question. Yeah, there it is on the screen. Derek, here's a question, and I'm not sure if I think you're the right person to ask, but if you're not, where do you see the field of sentiment analysis moving? For example, identifying patterns and themes from audio data or other forms of communication.
So it's a great question, and I think that one of the challenges in sentiment analysis is to really get at the subtleties of colloquialisms and slang terms, and when people are expressing sentiment in a way that is ironic and so forth. So I think those who are working at the sort of forefront of sentiment analysis, I believe, are really trying to still uncover ways to get at those subtleties. Social media is a regular target of sentiment analysis research. And in social media, you've got this constrained amount of characters. And so people are abbreviating and using emojis and so forth. So I think some of that provides a challenge to those who want to do sentiment analysis. And it's still, I think, a very powerful, useful approach, but it has limitations like all of these other techniques have as well.
Okay, here's a question right up your alley. Is your book free?
The book, Internet Governance book, is free, so I'm excited about that. I'm glad we could make it available thanks to a grant from the Hewlett Foundation.
Okay, and it will be later on this afternoon. I'll be putting up a link on our Twitter feed to where you can get the book. So go to the Provalis Research Twitter feed and you'll see where you can access the book. I think probably this is a good time to wrap things
If
up.
I could just say one
please,
thing, Tony, I've been thinking about some of the questions that you said that people were asking, and I would like to just make one comment. So, you know, there's a can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's there are commercial tools and there are open source tools to be able to do text analysis. And for those that do want to use open source tools, it requires one, to be able to program, to be able to feel comfortable working in an integrated development environment, being able to find and install packages. And so, you know, many of the things that I've talked about today and that other techniques you can use, you can do in open source software as well. And for those who have those skills, you certainly can go in that direction, and many people do text analytics work going in that direction. But I would say that the vast amount of people who are interested in these areas see that they have access to large amounts of text-based data. They really want the answers that they can get out of the analysis. They don't necessarily have the expertise or background in coding. And so the fact that you have commercial tools like Provalis, WordStat, QDA Miner, and many other tools allow people who don't have a programming background to be able to still do really, really interesting and powerful text analytics work. So I'll mention that. I do program in R, work in RStudio, know a little bit of Python, but I like to work in R. So I'm happy to talk about that with anybody, but I think it is so powerful to have a commercial tool that's available to anyone, like the Provalis Pro Suite, to be able to integrate those techniques and capabilities in one package. So just wanted to mention that, Tony.
No, okay, that's perfect. Thank you. So thanks for participating, everybody. By the way, you did mention Mike Hine, your colleague Mike Hine. Mike Hine is going to be giving a lunch and learn at the end of October. I believe it's October 30th, but you can see it on the website, and he's going to be going in more in depth in how to build dictionaries. Our next presentation will be given October 7th, which is 2 weeks from now, by Dr. Yue Ewald, and it's titled Big Data in Criminal Cases, Digital Evidence Analysis with QDA Miner and WordStat. You can register on the Learning Webinar section of the website. And don't forget to check out the new features of QDA Miner 6 that we released yesterday. We will also be having a webinar on the new features of QDA Miner 6 on October 14th. You can also sign up for that on our website. So if you have any last comments, Derek, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. But I want to thank you very much. It's been very informative, and as usual, great presentation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Really happy to be here. And as you know, I'm a big fan of Provalis and the work that you guys do, and Dr. Pelledu and the rest of the team. So keep up the great work, and I look forward to continue to collaborate with you guys. And for anybody that's out there that would like to follow up on some of these, or anybody that needs help on this kind of work, just feel free to reach out to me.
Thanks very much, Derek. And we'll be sending everybody a recording of this. And like I said, for some of you who are asking some questions about that are really specific to the inner workings of the software, we'll try to get back to you individually on that. So thank you very much. Have a great day, and hope to see you in 2 weeks.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.